Robert Greene once said, when it comes to mastering a skill, time is the magic ingredient. My name is Jurgen Moors. I'm a coach, a strategic advisor, and a consultant. And I use this quote because last week, when we kicked off the first week of this 30-day live stream on intrapreneurship, we talked about skills. One of the aspects that we talked about was skills. And I also told you when you start in such a journey, it's not something that happens overnight. So time is really important. And skills is the topic that is the red thread through this week. We will talk a lot about skills. We will dive into certain details. We will use a lot of examples, but we talk about skills. And let's start today by just focusing on two major skill sets that you really need as a successful intrapreneur. The first one we already highlighted last week, and that's innovative thinking. Why is innovation and innovative thinking so important for a company and for a manufacturing company? Well, if you look at most companies, especially in the West, they're rather stuck in their ways. And how is that? Well, we've been living the mantra of operational excellence, continuous improvement already for such a long time. That's the sentence, yeah, we should focus on the low hanging fruit. Does that ring a bell? I've heard it so many times, but we have reached a point where the trees below are empty. There is no more low hanging fruit. Or if there still is, it reaches a state of rottenness. You would not like to have those fruits anymore. And the whole systematic of lean Six Sigma or combined lean Six Sigma makes us always make those small steps and never reach for those juicy fruits on top, that radical innovation, that breakthrough innovation. And like I said last week, what are the reasons for that is we have ended up also in manufacturing in short-term thinking. Courage, remember, has left the room. We are a little bit in fear. But remember, technology doesn't stop. Technology, digital technology, is moving at an incredible pace. And what you see is that manufacturing companies that are just starting and that are integrating those digital technologies from the beginning, they are becoming really, really competitive and outpace all the others. Now, let me tell you some examples of people who had the guts to use innovative thinking to change their industry and their company. And the first one is a very well-known example, and it is Apple and Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs is renowned for his innovativeness and the great entrepreneur he was. But if you look at it, when he returned for the second time to Apple, when Apple was in problems, Apple was already an established company. It was no longer a startup. So basically, he was a perfect example of a digital entrepreneur's company. And if you see what he and his team came up with in innovations, they really revolutionized the consumer industry. Another example that bridges both comes from Ken Kutaragi from Sony. He was working in manufacturing, focusing on sound chips for electronic products, but his dream was to develop for Sony a dedicated video game console. And despite the resistance and despite all the things that worked against it, his innovative thinking and his persistence to work on that established the PlayStation of Sony, which became a really important player in the gaming market. And the last really comes from manufacturing. If you look at a company like, for instance, Acme Industries from the United States, they were experiencing problems. They had issues in their supply chain. They were not competitive anymore. They embraced digital technologies. They used innovative thinking from, okay, how can we now use this digital technology to transform our own manufacturing as a company? And they started implementing IoT sensors for real-time monitoring. They used artificial intelligence for optimizing their production lines, cloud computing for improved data accessibility. And what happened? If you look back now, they are more competitive than ever before and are becoming the player with a large market share which they had in the past. The second big skill set is all about working in a team, collaboration, networking. I already mentioned that last week, how important this was. But you as an entrepreneur, you're just one person. And like me, you have 24 hours each day, not more, not less. And if you are like me, then you're probably not this person with a super brain that knows everything. You're just not the know-it-all. So we rely on other people to help us. We get to a point where we are constrained by the resources we can use. That's also when we need a team. That's also when we need our network. And those are so important. That's why they are so important. And let me give you two examples from my own past as an entrepreneur. One from my internal team, and it is at a certain point in time, I was responsible for one of the things was the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant was offsite, and my operators had to drive there to do some basic checks. Now we were in a phase where those operators could do for me a lot more valuable tasks to bring the company and bring it forward and make us more competitive. So we thought about, is there not another way of doing those standard checks? And there I came up with the quadrupeds. For those who don't know what a quadruped is, it's basically a walking robot dog. You've seen one from Boston Dynamics, for instance. Now, I knew I don't have the time to do this project completely on my own. I need people to help me. So I found one person internally who was he loved this type of robots and he really liked to work with it. So he was really fascinated by it. So I took him on board in the team. Another one, I reached out in my network throughout inside the organization, and I found somebody who was intrigued by communication. And we had to solve a lot of stuff around communication, around 5G, around data sets that we could transfer. Would we go and make the robot online, or would we deliver the information in packages? And those two teamed up. They took the project and made it the success that it was as a team. But I gave them the full responsibility for it. The second thing is in the same space, but now we're externally. And there were so many things and problems that I could solve with robots, but I didn't have the time and the resources in my own unit or in the company to tackle all of them. So I teamed up with a lot of people from the industry that were facing the same problems and that were looking at similar robotic solutions. So we started to share our problems and devise programs within inside an organization. In this case, it was Sprint Robotics as an organization, where we started to tackle each of those things. And we started pooling our resources from knowledge, pooling people, pooling money. And that way we could do the tests, we share the results, and that way we advanced as an industry, advanced as a group. And I personally, as a intrapreneur, advanced with my unit. I could see from, okay, this is successful, this isn't, this is something we should do on the short term, yes or no, because we've seen from these tests that this is really important and that it brings also a certain return on investment. So now you see why those two blocks of communication, collaboration, networking are so important, and why this innovative thinking as such, and not just staying the standard small step approach, why that is so important. Now, I would urge you to focus on your own company where you're working. How is it positioned? Are you also stuck in this operational excellence approach, or are you a company where you take the big leap? And the second thing that I want you to think about is me as a person. How am I in this networking collaboration? Do I still think that I can do it on my own? Yes or no? Where am I? Am I the ultimate entrepreneur already, or am I still at the beginning? And with those two things, I invite you to join me tomorrow when we will focus on something that the entrepreneur and the intrapreneur have in common, and that's the growth mindset. And if you answered the two questions before, then that is already the first seed of your growth mindset. But for that, I see you tomorrow in the next episode of the 30-day live stream about entrepreneurship. Bye bye.